Tosha.
Tosha.
Hello, this video won't be as serious as usual. Its purpose is to lift your spirits, but I'm sure it'll go viral and you'll be sending it to your friends. Why? This short introduction will make sense later. I heard a great term in America and started using it myself. You may have heard it on streams or videos. Vivek Ramaswamy is a template politician. In America, he used or maybe coined the term template politician. I won't spend a long time now explaining how it's defined and what the markers are, so to speak, but we will definitely discuss one marker. It's when a politician becomes the subject of memes because they often use the same words and phrases, usually out of place and to no effect. Poroshenko was nicknamed Diakula for saying Diakul, while Zelensky is known for Potuzhda and Tosha. That is, this is a person who obviously hasn't read anything in his life, doesn't know anything, and doesn't understand anything. He actually learned Ukrainian only after becoming president of Ukraine or during his campaign. Now he uses these words everywhere, appropriate or not. Now I'll show you an amazing compilation. I think you'll really enjoy it. But the bad news is that besides everything else, it's also a sign of a stupid person. You have to understand that this kind of person has been running Ukraine for 6 years already. And that's actually a dangerous situation. So while it's funny, please draw your own conclusions.
Money and so on, slavery and so on, hunters and so on and so on and so on, military conflicts and so on, thanks to telegram channels and so on, attacks and so on, highways and so on, the Minsk agreements and so on.
Solidar and so on.
Negotiators, etc. Prisons block their accounts, etc.
And so on, Bucharestku and so on, hospitals without electricity and so on.
Strikes on towers and so on, days of hunger and so on, airists and so on to manage and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on, then says CH and so on, they bomb and so on and so on.
And so on and so on and so on and so on and so on. To do electricity and so on and so on,
we will turn off and so on and so on and so on, TSMI and so on, turn off the electricity. And so on and so on and so on and so on. And so on.
A young person, an old person and so on.
And so on. These are the consequences of the war and so on and so on and so on. He was in the trenches and so on.
And so on and so on and so on. I have security and so on and so on and so on and so on and so on.
And so on and so on. And so on 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 and so forth. And so on and so on and so on and so on and so on.
Yes, naming in advance and so on bombs and so on battalions and so on independently.
And so on. Damba and so on finances and so on 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 and so on. And so on, Dosho, and so on, 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 and so on. There were shots, a landing, and so on. Dosho.
And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on, and so on.
And some calculations, something. And so on.
And so on.
And so on, and so on.
Jealousy.
About power, about, that's the minimum. About children.
Animals, about blackouts, about what's there, about many things, about minerals.
About and so on, so on, so on, so on, so on.
About.
And so on. And intelligence, and so on, 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 and so on. Something, 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 something.
Some guys there can't leave the country and so on.
What? And so on, and so on, and so on, and so on. Everyone enjoys living in some kind of fear and so on. You see, well, you could make 1,000 such compilations. And you know how Zelensky talks in general. 6 or 7 thoughts in one sentence, he never finishes any of them, doesn't complete them, immediately jumps to the second, to the third. These are all also signs of an unstable state, of a lack of intelligence. But again, I'm leading you to the thought that this person is running our country, and not just in peaceful times, but also during wartime. He, being in such a state and having such a mess in his head, is now negotiating with the United States, and negotiations with Putin are ahead. Can you imagine just what is the point of this video? Besides just having a laugh, in whose hands is the fate of the country and tens of millions of people? I'm asking you once again, we laughed. That's great and necessary, but don't make this mistake again in the future. You simply can't bring such people to power by default, you just can't. Because a person who expresses their thoughts and speaks like that by default has no ideas, no philosophy, no views on anything. Even Einstein said you should explain complex physics concepts in such a way that I think even a 10-year-old or a 13-year-old child could understand you. In the same way in politics, you should come out and speak so that a teenager can understand what you're talking about, let's say a 13-year-old. But if you come out with some vague blah 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 nonsense just rambling on, then that's exactly the kind of result you'll get, and that's exactly the result we have right now. Please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching this video until the end. Share it, leave your comments. See you.